Welcome back,
Here we
Andy.
are.
Welcome back to Totally Classic, the podcast where two old friends who are still friends now talk about all the things that people say you shouldn't talk about because we have found that exploring things together in curiosity and love is a fantastic antidote for the advanced stages of what is it? Late era tribalism that we live in the present moment. Political violence is up, political murders are up, political hostility is up. Um, People don't even want to date people or have people in their family who they disagree with politically, and that this is
Political
not.
AI videos are up.
Yeah, oh my gosh, they're everywhere. So, and that is fascinating too. At the end of our last season, we finished doing an episode with AI. And I'm very curious to see. I have spent more time talking and arguing with AI in the past 4 months than I have with humans. So I'm fascinated to how that's going to shape my pursuit of rational inquiry today here. I am Brendan McNamara.
And I am Andy Swindler.
And today we are asking the question, and yes, this is a real question, folks. I sent crazier versions of this earlier. Are progressives the worst? And I ask it in that way. I do have a thesis that to very thoroughly answer that question. Uh, I wanted to make it as seemingly hyperbolic, but to me, I before I make most hyperbolic statements, I spend anywhere from 4 to I don't know, in this case, maybe about 100 and something hours, 130 hours maybe, exploring this and making sure, oh, okay, trying to seal it up, steel man against it, fight that steel man, etc. AI is really good for that, by the way, folks. Um, Before I say it. So it might sound extreme, but I do mean it as a literal thing. And as usual, this is going to be slightly unfair that Andy, probably you're going to feel like a semi proxy for progressives, but I just consider
I,
you like my inside man, whereas I am observing the cohort from the outside of it. Um, so I apologize already for turning you into a proxy, but I'm always available to be a proxy for, let's say, a Christian nationalist or whoever. I just think we have our cohorts that we dwell amongst, and you live in, at least according to people in Chicago, the most progressive enclave in Chicago, which is actually a pretty heavily blue city. So that means a lot. So that's like a dominant blue, and that's like where it gets so blue that it's a deep midnight azure. So
well, I do have
go.
certainly a lot of inside anecdotal, stories to tell, and my own
Yeah.
which has come out on this show many times. And as I think about it, I suppose I'm still slightly more willing or hopeful might be the right word to identify with the term progressive
Yeah.
than even woke or social justice warrior, which we've also talked about in other shows.
Hmm.
So yeah, curious how this will come out.
Yeah,
Sure, I will.
I'm curious too. A lot of it comes from our conversations, and a lot of it came from actually a lot of this came from episode in the previous season that was like essentially asking like, are progressives writing their own dictionary? And that's really what started opening me up to the thing that I was like, oh, this is why I feel comfortable. My thumbs up is yes, progressives are the worst. Now, of course, you have to say the worst what. We'll get through that. And what is a progressive? We'll get through that as well. But talking to you, and then you and your wife and I can say partner in this case because she is both your partner in life as well as your partner in business. So I feel like that term's appropriate. I find partner like a very weird term for romantic thing. It's concurrent existence as business and pleasure is I don't know. It makes it a weird word. I don't like it. It's
Of
bad.
course you do. It's a strange neutralization of gender, primarily.
Yeah, and well, and in position too, because like partners to me, like business partners still
Right.
exist. Partners in crime exist. Partners in individual artistic endeavors. So it's weird to take like a bit. It's basically taking a capitalist word and trying to make it a romance word, and that seems real sad to me. It seems very late stage capitalism. All that to say, this might be an extreme statement, but I don't think it is. I will stand in and my put my thumbs up. But Andy, what is your pre-conversation thought? on such a broad statement as progressives are the worst.
Well, I assume you mean that are progressives the worst at being horrible people? And in that case, uh, no. Well, I'm going to go with thumbs down. That's just
Okay.
such a broad and extreme statement.
It,
It's an easy thumbs down for me.
right, right. It seems that way, right? That's how I felt as well. Okay, but let me do this by questioning. So this may feel like an interview, maybe not be your favorite thing, Andy, but this will turn into a conversation because I don't think we're ever able to pursue anything with great linearity. Yeah. Okay. I have a 5 point question, Mayor. The first one is if a political movement can redefine core words like justice, truth, reality, science, man, woman, there's up to 83 words that I've found so far that progressives use internal redefinitions for. So if they redefine core words that get past linguistics into semantics, even meaning the study of meaning, meaning what we mean by, like something like reality is an existentially semantic question. It's not simply a linguistic one. Same thing for men and women, because that's how we reproduce as a species and survive, that sort of thing. So if a movement redefines core words like this to fit its own beliefs, how do we ensure those redefinitions aren't just tools for silencing disagreement, essentially like open authoritarianism? How do we check that? And does that help us understand whether progressives are the worst or not?
Hmm. Well, a lot of my journey has been around trying to get my arms around the motivation and the intention behind it, and that's been
Mm,
a lot of our conversations. I suppose that's how I
yeah.
see people and humanity at large in general. Like, well, why? Like,
Yes.
why is somebody
Yeah.
doing this?
That's my
And
favorite question.
certainly our conversations have shed a lot of light on what is happening in terms of
Yes.
the actual words and language shifts and all of that. And then zooming out and trying to look at why.
Yeah.
So that's where I go with that question is perhaps an answer, or at least a road to an answer is, why did anybody feel it was necessary or beneficial to change those words to begin with? And that's sort of my whole conundrum with progressivism in general.
Mm,
Talked about is I still believe it's rooted in good-heartedness, in a belief in the good of all people, a philosophy I hold, and I think you
yeah.
aligned with. Yeah. Excuse me. This simple concept of dignity and agency. I know we've used that test a number of times, and I don't. I'm not sure I've ever heard anybody else express it exactly that way. That was sort of my own
Hmm.
distillation
Yeah.
of a lot of other ideas, but so if we take the intention behind a lot of those changes as
Yeah.
noble, ethical, we could spend whole episodes as we have picking apart each one of those words.
Yeah.
Um, Generative, beneficial for people at large, then that intention is what ought to be tested, right? Did what we set out to achieve with these changes actually come to pass? Um, and in the middle, I think you're asking about the middle part, which is
Or
how.
even the pre, which is like on what basis would their thesis that changing fundamental terms and demanding adherence to them, how would that provide benefit and not just be, I think specifically in the progressive system, how is that not actually creating the very thing that they say is the bad thing, which is oppressive power structures where truth is dictated from on high?
Hmm.
So I would even say it's like in the forming of it, it's like, well, like what tenability is it that the intention is good, meaning it would be received as good or seen as good or felt as good by those interacting with it,
Yeah,
if that makes sense. So even before the middle, I
yeah,
think.
yeah, sure. If we don't set out on the right path or have the right goal in mind, but then
Yeah, and it's specifically since progressives have removed objectivity, reason, and science as like particularly relevant to assessing problems, it puts you at least in the sense of how do you know that you're not just doing this in order to be the worst? Like how do I know? Because every and I would say this because every single movement throughout human history has always justified itself as net benefit.
for
The
the good.
fat, yeah, the fascists did it, the communists did it, the Khmer Rouge did it, Al Qaeda did it, the U.S. government did it. You can see that who I'm interweaving. Listen, we've done slavery was justified, Jim Crow was justified on public health, continuity, social protection for both blacks and whites, and so the intention, as stated from everybody, seems to be this is for your own good.
And one of
But
the
that,
challenges baked into that is I think a lot of progressives would argue that they are based in science and research. And it's not my jam,
yeah, yeah.
the two of us, you're the researcher and I'm the I want to say I'm the feeler, but that's not a contrast because it's not like you're not a feeler, but that's I think one way to describe our contrast,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You do mountains and mountains of research and you're reading these studies. That's how this whole thing started, right? The
Yeah.
with COVID. um, so that alone could be picked apart. Like, well, is progressive reasoning scientific? For the sake of this episode, so we don't get totally lost in that rabbit
Sure.
hole, I'll just accept, that you're saying it's not. Uh,
Well, I would just say I can tell you four quick ones.
yeah,
Progressives were dominantly and still even to this day dominantly like pro masking. The consensus of evidence of masking is that is of little to no relevance to respiratory virus transmission unless an N95 worn without interruption. That's not what's happening. So that flips science upside down and says I'm going to listen to expert opinion, even if uh, systematic surveys of RCTs, which is the highest tier of scientific data, speak the opposite. The same thing happened for the hatred of the unvaccinated was really high in far left cohorts, which progressivism is the most extreme cohort on the left. It's the equivalent of, I guess, of the Faith and Flag Party, which is kind of like a Christian nationalist on the right, just so people have a sense of this is from outside of the cohort. This is just how the cohorts are defined by Pew and whatever, just political analysts, that sort of thing. Somewhat neutral. Um, they sort of rejected the unvaccinated to an enormous degree, even though the unvaccinated included people who were more protected than them. Again, by the consensus of evidence, they're rejecting gender and actually at this point biological sex. They're like sex is a spectrum. It's a new book coming out. It was just reviewed in the Lancet, and so they're running. Oh, and against embryology. So whether they reject that human life begins at conception, even though we know that scientifically. So I just mean like for progressives, there are multiple things, like much like you'd accuse, let's say, people on the far right of ignoring the science around climate change and man-produced climate change, which are based almost exclusively on modeling studies, guys. So again, we just don't have the level of evidence that enables you to just go, well, they're not convinced because we don't have it. Because we don't have it. We can't have it. It's too long of a time. It's all predictive. Um, so in that way, I think you can actually prove very substantially that progressives are very uninterested in science, or actually because they're very uninterested in empirical reality. That's kind of not it's not what they're. I think they're openly that. I think that if you can lean on social science, then which is barely science at all, I would even say it's non-scientific because it's so grounded in subjective reality, whereas science is an empirical process. It's direct observation. You can't directly observe someone's depression or anxiety. You can really only they have to tell you it. It's just things that people told you, which is I think why progressivism likes quote unquote social science, because it's really just like compilation of claim, if that makes
yeah.
sense.
Well,
So I was like, in that way, you can prove they're not entirely anti-scientific, but they are generally over at least four or five of their tent pole. Like, and you can disagree with me here though too, that I feel like every progressive is at least in the cohort of, or is not rejecting those streams from within the cohort, which to me is compromises is sufficient to establish membership in that case.
Yeah, maybe this matches up with something I was cynically came to me a couple of years ago as I was processing some things happening to me in social justice circles
Yeah.
and decided that the social justice, my new definition of a social justice warrior was somebody with a really big heart that avoids complexity. So it might be related because
Sure, sure.
complexity is science, but science is more than complexity, right? It's sort of, the scientific method is rooted in curiosity, like rooted
Oh,
in the
absolutely.
idea
Yeah.
that it is designed to be disproven and evolve and change.
Yeah.
And that I think is perhaps that's the part that feels unscientific. And we've talked about that
Yeah.
length
Oh,
and
yeah. Yeah.
you recast it as a religion, which I thought, that's actually pretty interesting and maybe more accurate. And in those three categories you just mentioned, I'm glad you went
Yeah.
there. To give, just in case somebody hasn't listened to every single episode we've ever done, I think there have been 66. Uh,
Yeah.
those you've highlighted three, major themes that we've explored. And the first, there's a slight distinction. The first one stands out as slightly separate from the second two,
Mm.
but I'll just say, it's COVID, gender, and abortion broadly. And
Hmm.
now with COVID, it was fascinating, um, because that did involve some of my breakup with one of the more hardcore social justice groups I was involved with,
Oh, yeah.
even just lightly challenging the idea of masking or vaccination. And after you and I had just and been talking, and maybe one person in the group being interested enough to hear the episode we did about it and all that.
Yeah.
But everybody else just being like, oh, it was because it was like comparing it to segregation, and it was
Yeah.
just that was like a deal breaker. So that I think did ensure like the religious territory that they're like, I don't know, we could come up with like the Ten Commandments of progressivism.
Yeah. 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 I've been doing that a lot. Yeah.
Well, and the other two are absolutely in that, right? So
Yeah.
COVID is different in the sense that it was, I mean, we talked about it so much, but it's not like COVID. It's not like I don't know, biological, viral disasters or diseases are like a common subject. I mean,
Yeah.
it's right. This was a unique sort of moment in seeing how different cohorts would react to such a situation for humanity.
Yeah.
Um,
That
and I
was yeah, that was the big revealer for me. Like I didn't
yeah,
really know progressives were that big of an issue until stress response. And then I was like, whoa,
right. So
that's it.
COVID tested
Yeah.
the stress response. Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other two are like commandments, right? That I mean,
Yeah.
if you're going to be a progressive, I mean, I'm in so many conversations where it is just I'm still considered safe for anybody not listening to this show,
Yes.
um, which is where I let it all let it all fly. Uh, and there's a just it is a commandment level assumption that you
Hmm.
are in favor of uh, gender fluidity
Yep.
and pro-choice, and
Yeah.
um, which I do still consider myself pro-choice, but for different reasons, as we discussed at
Yeah.
considerable
At length. Yeah.
um, and so even that is maybe a good example where it's like I don't just accept the the commandment or the religious doctrine
Yes.
with you. It was helpful to reason through it, and even in that reasoning, I had to admit a contradiction and an
Mm.
exception, and just realize, okay, well, okay, I'm just going to name that exception, and
Yep.
it's big and weird and hard, but it's like at least it's reasoned, at least it's sort of understood and named.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
maybe
Well, yeah.
that's what's missing. And when you're saying it lacks science, it's like we're not naming it. We're just taking this little sliver, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. To me, it's just direct ignoring of the best quality evidence, meaning just the highest tier of scientific evidence in multiple arenas. Like, and even stuff that's like it's a scientific fact as near as we know what facts are that human life begins at conception. But there are tons of people who just full on just like that's not true. And you're just like, okay, well, that's more true. Like we have more tight, intricate data that that's true than, let's say, the Earth is spherical. Certainly more of that than like like cross species evolution or the Big Bang or all sorts of other things that people are like, it's our best theory or whatever. So and specifically in progressivism, the this is more academic, but I think progressivism is phenomenally academic. Also, just based on the cohort who occupies progressivism, it tends to be college-educated white folks, so the largest group, and then but that's who it attracts. People who like to think and analyze about things, but also still want, I think, the cohesion of like a religious group or a tribal group. Um, it is specifically antagonistic to objectivity. We all remember the Smithsonian put this placard up non-ironically, not as a capturing of like, oh, remember this time in history. They put it in their exhibit to sort of explain the world, and it called objectivity whiteness or white supremacy. So it was like they fully turned objectivity into you're racist if you're into objectivity. So that is that's a bold move to attempt. And so my whole thing is like, that's my question. How do we ensure that they're not that progressives aren't doing this to silence disagreement and to basically take away any tool that humans have used to solve every other social crisis in human history? They're taking those tools away so they can't be analyzed alongside history. Like we basically have to throw out all of history because we can't use reason, appeal to universal values, which that's how the abolition of slavery happened. That's why women's suffrage happened. That's how the civil rights movement happened. It was always those things. Reason, using reason and reasoning out loud, often poetically, and then appealing to universal values, like aren't we all made in the image of God, or aren't we all human, or blah blah blah, that sort of thing. But that for the progressives are like, no, that never achieved enough. It wasn't stable enough, and so my contention is they're actually trying to get rid of the entire system. Like anything that came from the Enlightenment, liberalism, Enlightenment, rationality, tolerating other people's viewpoints, all of that is like, nope, it's like, nope. So that's, as far as I can tell, they are using these tools to silence disagreement because we have misgendering laws, which, in order for a misgendering law to exist and apply the way that it's applied in multiple states in the United States of America, you have to redefine the prefix mis, which typically means wrong or mistaken. And then you have to redefine gender. And if you don't do either of those things, and then if you don't redefine what he and she mean, which means you're not using the wrong pronoun or the right pronoun or whatever, then you have to redefine four words already in order to for that to be so. And they already have laws on the books making that happen, making people do that. So to me, the evidence is already kind of there that silencing disagreement is very, very, very much part of the program. So I was like, how do we know they're not just for that? Or
Well,
what's
that's
yeah,
I don't know if you just changed your wording or if I just finally heard it differently,
yeah,
but silencing disagreement.
yeah,
No, I know you said that before because I wrote it down, but
yeah,
it's funny. I don't know why it landed differently there. That I would argue, yes, absolutely, progressives are for silencing disagreement.
yeah,
I don't see a lot of good faith argumentation
yeah,
or debate or openness. It's really
yeah,
like, no, 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 this is the way it is. This is the good. And the challenge I have is that knowing many, many people, having been
yeah,
spent, still having many friends, still seeing all my feeds. I forward you things just because I think we're probably living in different bubbles still.
yeah.
I know it's rooted in at least words of goodness, and this is um but it's the contradiction I'm realizing in this moment is it's goodness, if we could accept that motivation,
Yeah.
mixed with, well, if you I don't want to hear about any disagreement to this version of goodness.
That seems pretty prevalent to me. And as far as I know, that's more cultic than any Christian church I've ever been in. So to me, I'm like, this is the definition control thing is the first line I would ask anybody about it, which is like, well, why is that allowed? Like, isn't that breaking the rules? And especially when you're top down systemically oppressing people who disagree with your view, meaning they are deplatformed, taken off of social media. That's happened. There are people who have been had civil penalties applied to them. That's happened. There's people who have lost their jobs. That's happened. There's people who have been censured in speaking. Like this is like I can't remember which state it was, but there was like a state Senate or state whatever House of Representatives kind of meeting, and then someone was talking, and because according to the person running the meeting, another one of the fellow representatives, kept using the wrong pronoun. They were prohibited from speaking anymore. They had their time withdrawn and they were not allowed to speak. So, like as far as the imposition of ideology goes, we're already past like 1932 Germany, 33 Germany, in terms of here's our thing. We're not going to brook dissension. So I'm just like, how? Or maybe this is even the question. Where does the good faith come from? Like, how do you see that as anything other than uh, what is it? Benevolent dictatorship. Like, this is still tyranny, but they're saying it's tyranny for your own good.
That's a tagline right there.
Yeah. I mean, most tyranny is framed that way too, though. They're like,
Well, and
I
that's
would, yeah,
that's funny because somewhere I have like the mini version of that book on tyranny, and I was
yeah,
at a friend's house the other day, and she had like the big illustrated one, and
yes,
it
I
was
had
on
that.
it was
Yeah,
on display. It was like,
yeah.
I was like, huh.
It's
Uh,
really good. It's so good because they wrote it and it's like there's a ton of Trump pictures in it. So you can tell the authors of the graphic novel
yeah,
are definitely trying to making it about Trump. But if you just read it, I took like 19 pictures of it, of different things. And I was like, this is what progressives are doing right now. Like, this is what they did. They literally made us fear our neighbor, want them to be put in government camps, like, told us that we were going to die if we got near our neighbor. Like this is all sowing sowing the seeds of tyranny such that the state becomes the delivery mechanism for everything. You have to turn to the state. You have to trust the state. You have to do what the state says. But the state is specifically being dictated by progressives. And this is the AI part of this. The reason I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most important aspect is it gets to semantics, which is foundation for all thought and understanding, communication at all. So this is actually the most important level of analysis. No matter how much people dismiss it, they're just literally they're literally wrong to dismiss it. And AI is specifically programmed with progressive bias across a great number of categories. Every single one, Claude, or the one I've been using. Sorry, the top three I've been using. I don't use Grok, but maybe that has a different one. Different. That might just be by choice, whatever Elon Musk says. So, but ChatGPT, Copilot, which is Microsoft's one, and Claude all have pretty much the same schematic, and it takes longer with different ones to like wrangle them to help them see it. Once they can see it, they can start pattern recognizing it. And so our AI overlords, which I theorize is probably going to really take over a lot of what Google does for us, which is already it's biased, like a politically biased organization, and their news feeds are like 90% left wing and less than 10% right wing. So we're already kind of being shown the world that way. Also, anytime Christians or let's even call them right wing people try to get their values, quote unquote, into schools, it becomes like a national, if not an international news story. But for some reason, progressive religious people are allowed to teach their theology, and it's not. When people got pissed about it, people started being like, they're coming to these meetings, they're domestic terrorists, they're blah blah blah. Literally got like shamed and threatened for challenging, even though challenges I thought how we got here. All that to say, if then AI is programmed to that, that means there's an entire generation coming up who will be trained under these new definitions, which means they can literally make them happen. And some of them are as fundamental as truth and reality. So I was like, that's a big deal. And it's inorganic. So then how do we know that it's not? How do we ensure that they're not just tools for silencing disagreement? Like how do we, because my problem is the only way I can do it are the things that progressives say not to use, which makes me doubt their motivations all the more. I would use
mm,
reason and evidence, you know, like gender affirming care long term. There's only 6 studies over 10 years. 5 of the 6 show long term net harm. So I would just go, oh, okay, well, if the best evidence says here, this is this. So to me, science is just a great thing because to me, as a Christian, science is like the neutral meeting point where avowed atheists and religious people can all come meet and go, oh, well, I don't know. They tried it and they checked it. They ran it and ran it. And then they ran it in a tested fashion. They ran it in controlled fashion. we all go, I don't know. I'm not going to just chuck that out and be like, no, I don't know. In the Bible it says rains are pulled up through the ground or whatever. You know what I mean? You just go, oh, okay. Well, hey, if you were able to observe it and repeat it multiple times, I'm going to pay attention to that. Um, but again, progressives function, I think, like an extreme religious organization, and that they are not interested in any evidence that doesn't kind of support their view, and they try to make everybody else be quiet. So to me, I'm
Well,
just like, that's why I can already start to say they're the worst, because I don't know any other cohort in American politics that does that, or even is attempting to do that to that degree in the level of meaning and understanding. You know what I mean? I think everyone else, as far as I can tell, every other group is arguing about implementation of shared values.
mm,
So literally, everyone's trying to protect the vulnerable. Everyone's trying to help people have more freedom. And then also take care of those who can't take care of themselves, and then empower everyone to take care of themselves. Also, I think that's like a general broad thing. Everybody agrees on it. And then everybody disagrees on how are we going to make those things happen? Like and defining it, then, and what is truth and what is reality? You're like, well, okay, the reality is 34% of blah, 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 right? That's where our brains go. So when you take that away, again, at least on this question one, progressives, as far as I can tell, the only people who are trying to change what reality and truth, et cetera, means. And since they are making people just believe it or else, I'm just like, I don't know how to steel man good intentions or good faith with that, if that makes sense.
well, I'm glad you listed those off because at a high level, like yeah, those shared values sound wonderful, and I think progressives and other cohorts would have a lot of things to say, like protect the vulnerable. Well, a progressive would
Yeah.
say that includes trans people, that doesn't include unborn babies, you know.
Right. But both are people. And no one, and this is the funny thing, is no one's trying. This is why I don't really believe the progressives care about the marginalized, is because the unborn are the most marginalized cohort of human beings on the planet. Just factually, rationally, objectively, human beings. There's no test for legal personhood in assessing who is marginalized, because black people were marginalized during slavery and they were not recognized as legal persons. So you can't, same thing for Jews in the Holocaust. So progressives don't protect the marginalized. That's part of a branding thing. They're interested in some marginalized, some of them, but it's not like, in some ways that's the good faith caveat, is they're looking to do that. And I was like, well, but they're not looking to do that in terms of principle. They've also redefined who counts as marginalized and who doesn't, which means they'll participate in the marginalization of some people, whites, Asians, the unborn, whatever, MAGA Republicans, or the unvaccinated, the unmasked. And so, yeah, so we're left with a sticky wicket, meaning as soon as they protest such a thing, because I have the lived experience of being a child in the womb. And so my lived experience then, because I suffered under the oppression of living and marginalization of living in a system where I could be legally killed. And I was actually, my abortion was at least discussed. Around the 3 month mark, when I was 3 months grown in my mother's womb. So I was under that threat. So then I can speak from my lived experience that, of course, I am and was a person, whether the law recognized me or not, which, if we have evidence, if we're allowed to introduce evidence to something and reason and universal values, then we can argue for that. But since those have been taken away, then I don't know. To me, seems to me these redefinitions are literally to make it impossible to to argue against their thesis. Where
well, and
it just doesn't mean that. No, that word doesn't mean that anymore. So your argument is wrong. And you're like, well, I can prove it. Like gender's a great example, right? Proved it from 1474. It's meant human beings divided by biological sex cohort. In the 1950s to 1990s, gender became the single most used term in the West to speak to biological sex cohort. So it peaked during our lifetime. And now there's two academic schools that then push the idea that it's biological sex cohort and the social mores associated with those things, such that if you read most summaries, AI will summarize it this way, even though this is not primary definition. They'll say that's the definition. And then there's a brand new definition, which says it's a subjective claim that can't be falsified, whereas the other two can be falsified. So you're introducing a thing of like, this is unassailable truth, and if you disagree with me, you're bad, dangerous, etc. But it specifically and concretely is creating a thing to where you can't say it's true because that's not what true means. You can't say it's real because that's not what real means. You can't say it's not someone's identity because that's not what identity means. And so it becomes, and I've realized just this through practice, it that makes people impossible to talk to. It literally like, and the problem is like then people don't refuse to recognize that what they're doing is making a novel proposal. And so wouldn't it be better for us to return to the one that we both agree does also exist and is the dominant usage? Then shouldn't we actually discuss it from that point? That's the neutral place, right? But I think in general, it seems like progressives are refusing neutral ground. They refuse to participate on neutral ground. And actually, if they participate in neutral ground, it's actually condemned from within as like platforming toxic views or whatever that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that comes up to me is the basic posture of
Yeah,
progressivism is defensive. Is purported to be defensive anyway.
yeah,
And I think what I hear you suggesting is that it's really quite offensive. Uh, Offensive and offensive, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, it's
Um,
offensive in terms that yeah, because it breaks with the consensus of all moral and ethical traditions outside of utilitarian ethics and moral relativism, which is really just immorality based on moral. Like moral relativism is actually more of an ethical system, even though it uses the word moral. So yeah, no, it's pretty offensive, and they're because progressives are winning. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
Like progressives have the most disproportionate institutional power of any political cohort in the United States of America. I would contend, as a worldwide cohort, they have disproportionate power across the world, like the entire world, because they're a super small percentage of people, but they represent up to 90% of certain academic pursuits, anywhere from 75 to 85, 90 of journalists. So academia, journalism, education, media, they have, I mean, literally their influence is probably times anywhere from 10 to, I mean, maybe 100.
yeah.
So then they are, they are the institute. I mean, they are the institution.
I guess it's a strange thing to say again, use the word hope, but my
Yeah.
hope is that it's rooted in this incredibly deep heartbreak and
Yeah.
probably I think it's just generally true for all of us. We have unhealed wounds, and
Sure.
when acting from that, I've been in some circles. I don't know if anybody's ever really modeled this, but that will sometimes say like there's the bomb throwing stage of move embracing progressivism or being a social justice warrior, and that's the stage where you're just like, oh, it's adolescent basically. It's like, oh, I have all the answers, like fuck you all, like I'm just gonna like
Yeah. Yeah.
move through this. And then as you mature you realize like, oh, of course nobody has all the answers, and it just wasn't useful to begin with because that's so separating.
Yeah.
That act of throwing the
Yes.
bombs is such
Yeah.
an act of separation that it's certainly not fixing what you think is wrong, and it's actually probably contributing to it. The other thing that's coming up, and again, this is why I kind of separate COVID, is there's a funny, it's pretty selective, like which things from history we get to talk about. When
Yeah.
you mention COVID at this point, even I'm like, my God, that's old news. Like why? Like I would just scratch two of those off the list because I mean, it's like who cares? But you would say like, well, of course they're still relevant because we never actually talked about it and we never healed it, and it's
Yeah.
what's to say that isn't just an example of what would happen next time in such a stress response.
Yeah. Yeah. Or now that the response has been created once, in part by a threat, but in part by telling everybody what a big threat it was dishonestly, repeatedly, you can manufacture that. And we already saw during the same time period that manufactured, right? Where people were polled multiple times. And this is just the left in general. This is not progressives, but I think they led the movement generally. People thought 1,000 times more black men were killed by the police than were actually killed by the police on a yearly basis. So exaggerating threat is totally part of the playbook. And it's happened with and then it shifts to climate change, or it shifts to ICE raids, or it shifts to Israel, Gaza genocide. This is all coming to get you. You know what I mean? Like it's all, and or let's not pretend like Trump is this boogeyman of just unheralded extremity, right? And he's a populist. The dude's a middle. He's literally he's the middle of the right. He's socially more progressive than any other Republican president in U.S. history. But since he's not all the way, he's just doing strong things over there. He's so terrible. He's going to destroy everything. So it seems like the machine is built to just keep moving, panic, roll it over to the next thing, to the next thing. Now, I would fully say that every political group weaponizes exactly that sort of crap. That is not wildly unique to progressives. It's just that progressives, again, this might sound crazy to people, but I ask you, just like research it yourself. Progressives do disproportionately control academia, the media, education, and the social sciences, psychology, et cetera, that sort of thing. They just have wildly disproportionate influence. The same way that I don't know, this probably isn't even true, but like maybe there's way more people on the right in who are administrators of banks or no, engineers. Engineers supposedly are like one of the biggest Republican contingents. So everyone has their cohort up to business, but this to me is it's the most concerning and most dangerous thing, and it looks like history and smells like history. It smells like the People's Republic of China. It smells like Mao's China, where if the old people didn't start using the new terms, but that the party dictated, they would be publicly shamed. They would often be publicly beaten and that sort of thing. So we haven't gotten to that point, but public shaming has absolutely occurred on a long basis, and books basically progressive blasphemy laws are already on the books. So I was like, the thing is like, at what point do we openly recognize that everyone's trying to solve something theoretically, and the only people who are trying to redefine fundamental reality are the progressives, which makes them, again, either the most revolutionary set that we have in our society today, because they're saying change everything.
I mean, and
Anything.
that's
Yeah.
what, again, to try to, maybe progressives are saying every things are so fucked,
Yeah.
you have to dig up the foundation, you know?
Yeah. But then the problem is like I'll ask you from the inside. So you take objectivity and science away, and you take away reason, rationality as primary anymore. And you take away shared universal human values because progressives specifically don't apply them universally. They're specifically non-egalitarian. We would call them hypocrites in the past. I'm just trying to be gentler and say non-egalitarian, whatever, ethicists, because they only apply marginalization to those that they decide to, or they only apply the word indigenous to people they decide to. It's not, they're not pursuing any of these things as like everyone deserves these same rights. They're saying these specific groups deserve not just the same rights, but equal, special rights, right? Like no one's trying to deprive any trans people of any rights whatsoever that everybody has. Like there's none. They're being denied special rights, meaning they're not being included sometimes as a special protected category. But most people don't have protected category status, so that's not. And so that's the thing. So it's like, are they even lying about who they're trying to protect? Because by affirming gender affirming care, they're not reducing harm. So, but they're telling people to shut up who talk about it. You know what I'm saying? Like my whole thing is just like I can't, having argued this out with AI for hundreds of hours, who has a progressive bias, like I can't find a steel man that's made of steel to suggest these things aren't being done specifically to keep people from questioning and like tearing down their worldview, like beating it. you know?
Well, and to make it more personal, we've each had interactions between during the season break
Yeah,
that reinforced some of these ideas. In my case, I was accused of being anti-Semitic on
that's
LinkedIn
right.
um, by all reasonable analysis, a hardcore progressive professor, actually in the town I was born in, Columbia, Missouri,
Hey,
and a Jewish woman, who stated a lot of things that I've certainly said and believed in and built for, like safe space, brave space kind of stuff.
yep,
Uh, which not so much safe space, which I've drifted a little away from. Well, it's funny. Yeah, there's a lot of, in fact, I was even recently on a call where they were like, well, we don't need safe spaces, we need brave spaces. And I generally agree with that. But it's
yeah,
another good example of where I think we get pretty tangled up in the language. So in a weird way, maybe you would like this part about the progressive movement because they are looking at a semantic argument and saying, you know what, it's not just about making
yeah,
these safe, protected spaces because uh, that's like no like well it's weird though it's entangled with the argument that well no quote unquote marginalized person is ever safe in a space if they're encountering other folks.
right. But we're all
um,
marginalized.
yeah and
Every
this
like I'm just mean every human, every cohort of human beings on the planet has been marginalized by the definition of what is marginalization. So that's what I'm saying. Like when you start carving out special exceptions for anybody, whether it's your Trump's best friends or all my trans friends or whatever, like your doesn't that violate the very premise itself?
well and
Unless,
this
yeah,
this might be something we all agree on.
yeah,
I get a little annoyed because like I literally be in a conversation where that becomes the entire conversation and
yeah, safe or brave. I don't
but
know.
but that happens with us all the time,
Yeah,
so I don't know.
yeah,
I was like, oh, maybe you'll appreciate that.
I do. Well,
But I
that's why
think
I
we would
analyze them
all
that way.
more or less appreciate the idea of a brave space, which is,
Yeah,
in theory, where you can say the edgy stuff. You can say what's coming up for you. You can ask hard questions.
yeah,
And within that, yes, some degree of what we might broadly call respect of that I won't go there because that could be defined so many different ways and it becomes kind of part of the religious piece. Uh, but that idea of courage and bravery
yeah.
I think is maybe part of what you're advocating for because it's not courageous to just adhere to a certain
No.
doctrine and just
Yeah.
say, well, that's that and that's it and that's
Yeah.
all of it. It's courageous to question it and it's courageous to explore it and it's courageous to be willing to shift it when there's a mountain of evidence, pointing in a different direction. So anyway,
Yeah.
with my going back to my story, I don't even know if I'd heard this term. I don't know if this is a newer term. So not only are they redefining terms as you're talking about,
Yes.
but there are like new terms that come up.
Yeah.
And this is an example. So what aboutness or
Oh, what about ism?
what aboutism? Yeah, there you go.
Yep. Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know. I didn't do my homework to find out when that sort of came about, but I hadn't heard it really. And
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
basically
About
what happened was it was
7, 8 years.
a
Yep.
Jewish woman just saying, uh, talking about how, defending uh, Jewish people, Jewish voices in these times,
Mm.
and in the context of that's actually funny. I'm actually forgetting exactly what she was talking about. So I'm not going to go look it up, but it was to me an opportunity to point out that there are certainly Jewish people causing a lot of harm right now, and in the context of Israel and the war, uh, and again another rabbit hole. Go listen to the episodes. But my response was basically like, look, if I see anybody causing harm or violating ethics or
Yeah.
whatever I'm going to call that out, whether they be Jewish or what have you. And because I phrased it that way, she basically accused me of, yeah, whataboutism and flat out anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And without, and then she was, backed up by her cohort. So that pile on quality, I don't think that's limited to progressives by any stretch. That's just like a sort of social human
No, yeah, I think
capacity.
I actually think progressives just have more of them.
Yeah.
Progressives have like dozens and dozens of them, where I think the average political cohort has anywhere from like maybe 1 to 3. But like progressives have done that with, again, 83 words. So then I would assume at least dozens of those if you violate, you're called anti. And I actually think, and I've talked about this before, I actually think this is the Republicans' like most progressive similarity is basically calling, they champion Israel to a fault, in my estimation, and that they jump on and do the same thing that progressives do for homophobe, anti-masker, anti-vaxxer, anti-trans, whatever, queer phobic, patriarchy, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? Progressives just have like dozens of them that they pile on about people. And then I would say anti-Semitism is the most consistent, like spurious pile upon that happens on the right. And Trump's been doing it too. DeSantis did. It was one of the things I hated the most about him, but Trump just did a new thing where it was like they were even allowed to like not fund businesses who were doing boycotts of Israel, basically pulling that up into the like that's anti-Semitic then. And you're like, well, hold on, you don't have to be, you can be neutral as to Semites. You don't have to be pro-Semite. You don't have to be anti. You can just be neutral. You're like just another group of people who needs to do things well, or when they do things poorly, we call them out. That's it.
And that was the nature of my comment. And
Yes, yes. I think that's a good, I think it's a very reasonable comment.
and I think I sent it to you and you even said, she needs to understand the socio-political climate she's posting this in because
Yes,
it was very much Jews are under attack right now,
yes,
broadly. And in particular, I think it was oh, that's what it was. It was like here are the dog whistles. That's what it was. It was here are the dog
yes,
whistles of anti-Semitism. And it was
yes.
that Jews have all this power and Jews have all this and and et cetera, et cetera. And anyway, uh, to button up that sort of scattered story is just the idea that it actually violated. She, went to the point of putting these principles of conversation in her post,
Yeah.
like how she defines creating a, so-called safe or brave space,
Yep.
uh, and then violated them. I mean, it was very much like open to, some form of like be respectful, but open
Yep.
open to conversation and debate and all this.
Yep.
And then it was just this total like smackdown and be like, oh, you didn't follow the rules. You broke the rule.
Yep.
You're out. You're eliminated from this. And I was like, well, I didn't, I didn't see the rule. I mean, I thought I
I,
saw the rules, but I guess I didn't.
yeah.
I guess there were
I,
unspoken rules. Yeah.
oh no, unspoken rules in the virtual world is in it, I would say a straight up impossibility. It's harder enough. It's harder enough. It's harder already in shared spaces to know what in the world everyone's unwritten rules are. I listen. I don't have a natural inclination towards paying that much attention to nonverbal cues and tension, or and somehow responding to it like I'm supposed to obey it. That's not how my physiognomy or my somatic understanding pursues the world. Um, but it creates an environment of diplomacy becoming impossible. So when it's done systematically enough, so on anti-Semitism, on accusations of homophobia, anti-masker, anti-vaxxer, um, anti-abortion, whatever, as though that would be bad, um, it it foments combat only by taking away all of the means of former adjudication of problematic issues. And as far as I can tell, this is my thing, but maybe there is something. Gosh, I'm not even going to get to the second question, I don't think, although that's what we're already talking about, which is, but I was like, what is it replacing it? If it's taking away rationality and objectivity, as near as I can tell, it's replacing it with standpoint philosophy or standpoint theory, which is it's replacing it with a caste system where certain people, if they're of certain identity groups, have more lived experience, wisdom to lead us into the future than others. So,
Well, that is blatant. That is
yeah,
blatantly stated.
people say that right out loud. So,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. This is what drives me crazy, Andy, is like, okay, because you and I were both born in the late 70s, right? So that's, I mean, from our point of view, that's crazy. That's a crazy thing to say. Like if you had said that to anybody in 2005, you're like, oh, do you know there's a political party out there that's trying to say we should only listen to people of certain identities? Everyone would be like, I know who you mean. You're talking about the KKK, aren't you? You're talking about David Duke, white supremacy. Like, so the crazy thing to me is this is how I know progressives are of such high influence. That really doesn't get discussed. There's not a lot of think pieces on CNN about that, about the fact that, like, wait a second, there's a political cohort that's saying, based on, and it's a fully vetted decades of exposure standpoint theory that, like, by virtue of your lived experience, you understand things better than other people. You have superior, literally, it's a supremacy doctrine. Why? And they're the most, I would say, the most like pop culture, popular political cohort. It was like, why don't we? The fact that we're not talking about that to me is further evidence of how crazy that is. Because I was like,
Well,
I think people don't even really want to address it, even though it's all written down. It's not even something like with Trump, where you're like, Trump's a racist. And you're like, well, because there was this case back in '73. You're like, wait a second. No, progressive academics, because it's so heavily in the academic world, everyone's written this down. The theories are written down. Anyone can look them up. You can pick up your chat GPT right now and be like, send me everything, send me a summary and 4 basic articles on critical theory or whatever. And you can just read it. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's the thing that blows my mind is it's not like you're saying it's 100% what people believe. And I was like, and they say it out loud, but no one talks about how that's the opposite of what the United States has pursued in terms of liberalism or enlightenment thinking. It's always like, no, 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 more and more people, we're understanding that more and more people have equal amounts to give. And that's what we've been pursuing as a culture, is trying to make sure more and more people have protection. And so now the idea is like, oh no, no, now it's actually we're reverting back to the supremacist model, which is, doesn't that scare? Isn't that scary? Like, isn't, I don't know, the first time you heard that, isn't that scary? In terms of like just what that means for society, in terms of like what we've now again, maybe we've been lied to our whole life. That was never, progress was never pushing towards equality. It was pushing towards proper recognition of true hierarchy. Is essentially what I feel like the progressive push is. Maybe no one said that specifically, but that seems to be what's happening. Like, but isn't
nobody can admit that
yeah,
because the premise is one of powerlessness and
yeah,
defense and rebellion. Like which is intriguing. Like given what you said about and I may it was like, oh, maybe in the beginning we should have defined some of our own terms. I think I tend to
yeah,
conflate progressivism and social justice warriors a bit, and it'd be interesting to line those up and say, okay, well, what's the spectrum? But I go back to the anti-Semitism piece because some of
yes,
these areas are untouchable because I mean, well, neither of us would deny the tragedy. I mean, we fully honor the horrific circumstances of chattel slavery, of the Holocaust, of you name it, right? Like
yeah,
we're not here to. And at the same time, because those, and I feel those traumas have been not healed, uh,
yeah,
they and not only are reliving, generation to generation and being cast out onto others, uh, but they've also become untouchable by certain
hmm,
cohorts, and
yeah.
that's I think the anti-Semitism piece is just like nobody wants to touch it because it's like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Which is, but then this is the fascinating thing. So I think a lot of times I conflate these two, but as you're saying it, I was like, oh, I'm being a little apples to apple orchard about it. So the subjugation and oppression and marginalization of Jews is our podcast is already getting flagged just because I said that out in a stream. No, but the subjugation and oppression of Jews is extensive, and because they were a very early, like, heavy writing culture. They captured a lot of things, wrote a lot of things down as far as their own history, way
mhm,
earlier than a lot of civilizations, or a lot of civilizations who were also writing at the time. A lot of those were destroyed, so we lost a lot. But we have like documentation of their subjugation throughout their whole Old Testament. We have it through histories, first person account histories by whatever Romans, et cetera, et cetera. Um,
Yeah, even limiting it to the Holocaust is
yeah,
a
they are.
sliver
They have
over
been
thousands of
yeah,
years. Yeah.
they've been chased out of. Uh, and actually, there was three or four different like sort of massacres and like excommunications from national borders leading up to when they finally moved back to whatever geographic Judea in the 40s. So they are arguably one of the probably two or three most marginalized cohorts, most oppressed cohorts in human history. But then, so then in that way, you almost feel like, well, there is some special category stuff going on here in terms of how much they've borne and how much we know about it. However, the comparison on the other side, which to my particular anecdote that I could relate to maybe bring this part one to a close, let's say for the trans element, gender identity as a concept, even introduced by Dr. John Money in the 1960s, picked up later by Dr. Robert Stoller at UCLA in the late 60s, that concept didn't even get posited as a theory until the 60s and 70s. John Money's experiments failed completely. So in some ways, there was that no one's going to pick up the tailwind on that. He ended up being his experiments to prove it failed. That gender identity was the thing. They failed. His subjects, he forced his subjects into they were children into sexual acts on video camera. They both committed suicide in their 20s. It was a disaster. So gender identity upon invention, total disaster. The idea of someone being transgender, which is again a novel claim that redefines what trans means and what gender means, has a super short history as we know it. So the oppression of trans people is it's not even comparable, and yet the responses are very similar. So I auditioned for, this gets me to number two, which we're already talking about. If a group claims to value diversity, but will socially or professionally punish or legally punish you for disagreeing on certain topics, is that diversity real at all, or is it conformity under another name? So I auditioned. I'm an improviser, comedic improviser, done it for decades, but I haven't done it for 5 or 6 years. I saw open auditions happening in town here at Comedy Works in Raleigh. I was super psyched. I'd been to an open jam there and some shows and a workshop, and I was like, I could really use some of that in my life, some yes and. I could just use a bunch of people to just like get together and play with, because I feel like everything I'm doing is always like directed towards some sort of output, because I'm an artist. So I try to make everything I do into my art and I want people to see it. So it would be nice to just do some shows, little 50, 100-person shows. You know what I mean? Just do it for the joy. So there's open auditions for troops. And I was like, that's a fun way to do it. I haven't been improvising with other people on a stage in any comprehensive fashion for 6 or 7 years. Very nervous. Pray it up though. And I'm practicing the week before, just give myself drills, and I'm prayed up. I'm like, you know what? I'm here to just do the experience and have the experience. And that will be the victory unto itself. I don't, even if I don't get cast, because I feel like it's a long shot. The audition goes great. Great. I'm the first person to get any of the coaches who are kind of watching us to laugh, and that gets laughs going. I'm relatively present, especially with being rusty, with everyone on stage. We try not to take anywhere weird. It doesn't there's no power struggles. We're working together, making stuff. I was like, oh, this is really joyful. We're all on the high afterwards talking about it. Seems great. One of the coaches comes out and is asking me about my background and saying, when I'm talking about what I'm doing, she's like, that's exactly what our show is. She's like, okay, this is exciting. Well, I'm excited, whatever. Excited to do more. We'll talk more. I was like, okay, great. 2 days later, I get an email saying, thank you for your performance. Although your improv skills are strong or whatever the heck, they said, and I think I can direct quote it. We truly appreciate energy and sharing your skills. While we're impressed by your improv abilities, we became aware of public social media posts in which you've expressed views that are not aligned with the values of our community, specifically comments that appear to be anti-trans. Comedy Works is committed to being a space that uplifts and protects trans and non-binary performers. We are not willing to put any of our community members at risk of harm or exclusion. As a result, we're unable to offer you a spot in the house team system. I fired off I actually used a great new AI tool called Kogo to help formulate my response, because I responded immediately just saying, well, I'm not anti-trans, because I thought from the standpoint perspective that like anybody's lived experience has to be validated. So I just said, well, I'm not anti-trans, which means you have to accept that, or else you're rejecting my self-claimed identity. That didn't work. And so my second one was much more emotional and like lived experience, meaning like here we improv together. You saw me improv on stage with people. I wasn't excluding anyone. I have no desire to exclude anyone. I've never expressed that anyone should be excluded. I've never advocated harm for anyone. No, fully stonewalled. Did not get hired though, specifically for. I don't even know specific. Literally, I don't even know what specifically. I just know that's what the accusation was generally. And so I was like, so when we begin to compare those two things, I think all I'm saying is like I think those that isn't an orange to orange comparison when you talk about like the most oppressed and marginalized group across human history, arguably been colonized by like 7 or 8 different empires, been abducted into slavery for generations, by multiple empires, by Egypt and Babylon. So I was like, and they've been kicked out of, I don't even know how many European countries, but they try to kill. I mean, it's like, it's just thousands of years of people trying to kill them, like a lot. So, and granted, they did plenty of killing themselves. They are not, nor have they ever been innocent. But comparing those two or having those strong reactions to one is a brand new thing that still most people in the English language don't even actually know exactly what's being discussed. Like they don't really understand what transgender really means or like what a trans man is. Most people couldn't identify that a few years ago. So having those unequal responses to me starts to show, oh, so even the place that this over here in this cohort that I consider to have an enormous amount of power, which is people who are, I don't know, Israel does probably too, but like people who are pro-Israel have quite a lot of institutional power in this country.
Absolutely.
But people who are pro-trans have a lot of power in this country as well. And it's the same thing where you can't even question, even though again, the transgender proposal is novel in human history, and it's not to protect a historically marginalized group. They're a group that literally, is, as near as anybody knows, didn't exist previously. No one has ever claimed to be able to leapfrog biological sex. There's no community on the planet that has no, in anywhere, in any culture, any language that has attempted to do that. There's literally like 4 to 6 cultures where people are like, they had names for people who acted like or pretended to be the other gender. That's all there is. And there's name the what is that Fafani in it's like was that in like Samoa, and so they're like we have words for that too. We used to say tranny, right? We used to drag queen, drag king, or that guy's kind of queer, or that guy's gay, or fey, or he's a confirmed bachelor. Everyone has always had
or they dress like Brendan.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. They just wear women's clothes, which I do. Anyway, so all that to say that like so then we have really massive reaction from a full evidence bank, and then we have a massive reaction from no evidence bank, meaning historically speaking, like one is truly like an apple orchard and one is like a single crab apple. But people are reacting, I would say, even as strongly, if not more strongly, to them both as though they're the same, which again is this. This is why I have a very hard time taking it as good faith that it's like trying to protect people from power when I can't, when it's you're like, well, but the people you picked don't, well, the people you picked have like inordinate power. Like trans people have equal to population representation in government. They are protected as a special class by many civil statutes, which already puts them above the average. They are more protected than the average person across the board. And nobody on the planet, as near as I know, not on the planet, nobody in this country that I've ever spoken to wants to deprive trans identifying people of any basic human rights, of any like universal human rights. No one at all.
Right.
Whereas people do want to kill Jews. Like there's an entire government whose charter was, let's kill all the Jews. And then they got elected. So then that's who the Jews are fighting. So I was like, okay, well, I can kind of understand it. Nothing else, I can at least understand the like, ooh, we got to be cautious. I'm not going to be cautious in my language, but if just because I'm worried someone's going to call me a bigot. But those are hugely different circumstances.
Yeah, and there's a number of layers. I'll mention a couple. I mean, namely, our stories are not apples to apples. Mine was like, oh, that's confusing and surprising and
yeah, but it's the same. Yeah, but it's the same phenomenon. It's the same general phenomenon.
It's the same general phenomenon, but that was kind of like, well, oh, that's annoying. Oh, it was public. That's an extra sort of,
Yes.
and yet still sort of contained and not that personal.
Yeah.
Whereas yours is heartbreaking because you're, like you said, like looking for this artistic outlet, and it wasn't a question of artistry. I mean, we've talked at least a few times, notably maybe the Rowling episode, about separating the art from the artist and all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not accidentally also related to trans. Um, but there's a I'd want to almost go back and reference some of our episodes where we tried to define harm,
Yeah.
because that's the key element here. Basically defining safety and harm, uh, and even exclusion, right? Which is a
Yeah.
sort of bizarre thing to say because they're literally excluding you. Uh, I get it. I have enough progressive programming and
Yeah.
quote unquote reasoning to get why they're saying that in a weird way. On a personal level, I'm heartbroken for you. I was relaying this to some close mutual friends that we have, and there's two kind of structural things that are bizarre. One is just the idea that it's improv to begin with, which
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have studied improv and I've not performed a lot, but it's kind of like that's a that's maybe the weirdest place for this to happen, because
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, for
improv
sure.
is by definition like you want diversity, you don't know what's going to happen. It's kind of by definition
Yeah.
not safe in the sense that you have any real knowledge of what's going to happen. That's literally what
Yes.
it's for, is actually to be fully expressive. Um, and then the other, I thought this was funny and true. And they were like, well, Brendan's not safe. And I would agree with that from the standpoint of one definition of safety, which
Yeah.
is making sure I feel good. Making
But
sure I don't
yeah. Yeah.
feel like I'm being confronted, like that I don't feel that I'm being attacked, right? And I know, because I know you would never do that physically, so we can eliminate physical harm. They may literally have conflated some things you posted online to the notion that you might physically harm somebody. I don't know. Let's like eliminate that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So ridiculous. So one layer down from harm from there is the idea that those trans folks can come to their community, feel safe, feel included, feel like they're being accepted fully in their identity, feel like people are using their pronouns and all the things they've requested or demanded or whatever. And you wouldn't do that. So in
Yeah.
a sense, it's like true if that's the definition of safety or
Well, but that's
inclusion.
what I mean. But is that allowed? Like, would you allow that from any other group on the planet where they're like, oh, but harm means this now, or safety means this now? Because that's not what safety means, right? If we open any dictionary, safety has to do with physical harm. Harm, even until very recently, was exclusively defined as physical harm, like measurable harm. You could prove that you're harmed, right? Like if someone said he hurt me, you're like, oh, okay, well then you're offended or you're emotionally hurt, I guess. But it's a colloquialism. But if we start just using the word harm full stop to define those things, you then are now saying your disagreement with me is violence because you're still using it in the United States of America, where most people's lived experience is harm is bruises, bumps, cuts. Did any harm come to you? Well, no, I just got real scared. That's how normal people talk. Like that's how most English speakers talk. And if you're speaking English in a country where that's where the words you're saying have meaning, you can't pretend that the other meaning doesn't exist. So improv isn't safe for anyone. So that is already not, it's not a relevant thing in terms of if you feel, that means like all of a sudden, if you feel like someone's putting you on the spot because they turned to you and made you a T-Rex and you don't know how to be a T-Rex and you can be like, I don't like that. I feel attacked. So what? Like, who cares how you feel? We're putting a show on.
That's why it's good entertainment. Like I'm trying to train
Yeah.
my daughter that feeling scared in a safe environment
Yes.
is a lot of what entertainment is one branch of entertainment that's really
Sure.
really
Yeah.
cool, because then you get to experience that.
Yeah, that discomfort with a person. And so then this is why I'm like, this is why I don't believe the good faith thing, because then they're saying, because these people might feel unsafe, you can't be here. Even though the only things I've ever said have been based on the consensus of the world, 90% of what I've said is based on the consensus of the world I live in, not my even personal point of view. I very rarely try to bring that in specifically with this because people get so weird about it. Meaning, in order to protect a perpeted less than 1% of all people, you're then excluding 60+% of all people, like within your institutional power. And in my case, I'm not a protected class in any way, shape, or form. There's systemic marginalization against my particular cohorts, multiple actually in the past 4 to 5 years, and multiple over my lifetime. I don't have special rights. And so, but I'm being excluded because somebody who's in a category that does have special rights would feel unsafe by my inclusion, which then asks, because this is the problem. You know what that demands? That demands that I respond in kind if we're going to just be fair about it. So that means anytime a trans person is around me, I have a right to claim I feel unsafe simply because they might in some way challenge my sense of self and my 47 years of lived experience.
Yeah, I was
So
wondering what this would look like if it was all reversed, if it was a cohort of folks with your
yeah.
ideology,
And they said, if,
and then a
yeah,
trans person comes in is like, oh no, I have to be sort of uh, addressed a certain way, and uh, I want my identity to be respected in the way that I hold it and that I see it.
yeah. Well, that changes the definition. That's another thing. That changes the definition of respect, right? So this is how it becomes impossible to dialogue. I just realized this over time for two of us because we would also go, well, it depends what you mean by respect. Respect literally has a meaning, like outside of both of us. Like whether I think it means something or you think it means something or all the people you're around think it means something, it actually has a meaning already. And respect, at least across the consensus of all dictionaries, which is our institutional authority as well as our like citation heavy. Here's how we prove this is so. It means due regard.
Mm.
So it doesn't mean obedience. This is what I'm saying. Progressives have changed respect into compliance and obedience, and that is, at least in my life, basically only the worst teachers I ever had in high school functioned with respect to mean that. I don't know anybody who isn't a tyrant who turns respect into you can't disagree with me. If someone was a fully like there are only two genders, which is a just a biological statement, it's not controversial, but for whatever reason, some people could see it as controversial. But it's a false controversy because that's not how controversy works. It doesn't work on individual claim basis. It's a rupture from norm. Anyway, if a trans person came and auditioned for a group that was like we only acknowledge two genders, I would not in any way support them saying that a person who identifies as trans can't play improv with us. Like that would
Hmm.
be insane. We don't have to do what they say. Just like if I walked into Comedy Works, they don't have to change their policy based on what I say. But I don't, nor is it in any way appropriate or protecting of, and in fact, in some ways, it's literally offensive against the majority of just English speakers, not hateful people. We're just talking about the words that you and I are using. Wouldn't impose that. And I think if anyone did try to impose that or say a trans person couldn't be around, even with no impositions on people's behavior, I, for one, would say that was completely inappropriate. Like that's not, yeah, you should never do that. Like a tyrannical attempt to do to keep a trans identifying person out just because of their claim.
Well, if we looked at it through a purely utilitarian
Yeah,
lens, what would the argument look like that it would impair, going back to the actual circumstance,
yeah.
that it would impair a trans person's ability to show up and perform and feel part of the troupe? I mean, I know there's
Yeah, that's not a legitimate claim. I would reject their claim and say that you're talking about your own personal fears.
mm,
I'm literally stepping into a place that has fully made their commitment clear. So I'm not, you are the power in this dynamic specifically. You are the power person, you're the oppressor. So what in the flip are you possibly worried about? Like what, like there's nothing rational for you to be concerned about when you have straight up all the power in this circumstance and in this present day society. So
I
that's
think it's the
that's
idea of
that's
a
literally like a black person can't come in here in a, like an all white group. That's because in that case, I literally am the minority, like out loud for sure in the collective. So then, what are you afraid of? You're afraid of being disagreed with, like that
well,
someone doesn't recognize your personal identity. But that's everybody throughout human history. All any friend you've ever had is like, I consider myself a friendly person. If someone says that and they're not a friendly person, everybody at the bar goes, "What? No, you're not." And that's that person's fully believed, like embodied sense of how they walk through the world. And they're self-identified. Rejecting self-identification is not controversial. And it's never been controversial, at least in terms of loving relationships.
yeah.
Like that's how we love people. So then that's what I would say. I was like, but that's a fantasy. That's not a real. That's like
Well,
me. What if I said that even to me? I would dismiss myself if I said that. I'm going to this place and like they really don't like my views. So I feel a little nervous about how I'm performing. Tough luck. Get over it. Like, get over it, Brendan. Stop. Just be yourself and let it fly. And if there's a problem, you'll figure it out later. That's life, man. So then,
my
yeah,
best guess is this kind of, I don't know, like bubble wrap
yeah,
environment.
yeah.
That's what I'm hearing is this is way more on the safe space than the brave space side, and
But it's
uh,
not safe. It's deeply unsafe.
I get it.
Yeah,
And what I think what my best guess is that they're suggesting as safety for a trans like massively over-indexing on that trans person
yeah,
and how they're going to experience that and the amount of friction they predict that you would create by even just not using their pronouns, for instance.
yeah,
And it's like we just don't even want that much friction. We're in a vibe here. We've got our kind of our protocols, our religious doctrine, if you will, our words we use. That's my best guess. And
yeah. And then, but when has that ever been allowed by any other group in human history, is what I'm asking. Where you say you have to use the words that we use to refer to other people, or else you really can't stay here. Because again, I've been in Catholic churches, I've been in evangelical churches, Christian churches.
well, it's usually
There's
not that overt. It often happens just socially because you're kind of
so
like,
if
oh,
you're yeah,
you're
if
not really in the vibe. You're not really,
I
and then you start to
guess
click with people, and then
yeah.
it's kind of like, man,
Yeah, but it's that's in like a social pressure way, which is again, now I'm low in politeness, so I recognize this is a different way for me to walk through the world. I don't care whether someone wants to hear a thing. It's
yeah.
not relevant to me. I can do that when I'm making art, then I'll pay attention to the audience. But other than that, none of us are beholden to keep to social mores. And there's never been actual consequences for most people until very recently, right? I think honestly, in the past 5 or 6 years, 5 years, I'd say, is when all of a sudden, if you didn't keep to a social more, you couldn't go to a grocery store, or you couldn't go into the city, you couldn't go to a city hall or a library or a museum. But other than that, that's never happened before in our life. So I'm like, well, wait, why does anyone get to do that? Isn't that exactly the kind of hate that I thought progressives hated? Don't they hate when other people do that? Like say that you can't come in here because you make us feel unsafe.
It depends on how the groups have been defined.
Well, but that's what I mean though. Like this is this makes it about definition again. So then it's because it's not based on actual marginalization, meaning the if you devise the metrics of marginalization, it would apply to a bunch of groups that progressives don't care about and even actively work against. The unvaccinated, for example, were around 30% of the US population with systemic restriction on their movement, et cetera. So we have all the evidence. All the evidence is there. But then if you even start counting marginalized, only the people that you evaluate as marginalized using a mystery scale, then isn't that all manipulation? Like can't there be no doesn't it seem apparent that there's no actual ethical basis involved because they're not protecting any. anyone on any basis of like analysis. They picked a bunch of groups and they're like, these are the people we're protecting. And we're going to call them this other stuff, but we're going to use a word that you already know elsewhere to use it, but we won't mean that thing. And then we'll say you have to do this, which is a word you know, but it won't mean that. So then respect, again, the respect, reality, marginalized, oppressor, indigenous, like all of those things are variable terms that don't actually have a stable metric. And so I was like, so then that means none of your terms actually mean anything at all.
I think a lot of it's motivated by guilt. I mean,
Yeah.
that's my experience is I sort of sit up straight when certain folks are talking. Uh,
Yeah.
Marginalization, therefore, is sort of conflated with loud voices who project a lot of harm, a lot of uh, unhealed wounds in some cases. And in other cases, and I'm seeing this actually recently,
Mm,
there's an assumption that the more a cohort has been marginalized, the more mature they are.
yes.
And
I've heard that as
I
well.
don't accept that. I don't. It's a little more complex than that. And I think maybe one thing you and I tend to agree with is just we're aware when we start casting very broadly, and it's like, hey, sometimes
Yeah.
that's useful just to have a conversation, but it's also really dangerous because it's very easily dehumanizing to say, oh, this whole cohort does this, and this whole cohort does this.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
this whole topic today is about a cohort, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
naming that is
Yeah.
broad.
Yeah. But it's unique in that like you experience the tent poles, but they all exist externally observable. So it's not even on the basis of inference or anything. It's all said specifically and concretely that
And
like,
so that point about some of this boils down to like who do we listen to and why?
yeah,
And I'm connecting right now that I think the dominant emotion there might be guilt, and
interesting.
particularly as somebody who hit a lot of pegs on the privilege, a lot of branches on the privilege tree coming down.
Right. But again, that's also internally defined and it doesn't have a stable set of metrics by which it is defined. Right.
Well,
Because that,
and something I think that's come out in our conversations is it's self-reinforcing.
yeah,
Theoretically,
yeah,
that's like useful and generous and empathetic,
yeah,
and it also reinforces the notions that I
yes, yeah.
of what
It says
privilege
there.
is,
Yeah.
that I have privilege, you know.
Yeah.
So, and that's in the more mature conversations I have in the social justice world, that people are aware of that.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
the more we use these terms, the more we're cementing them. When can we move beyond? When is it useful to hold on to this term as a way of identifying what's true, and when is it
Yeah.
useful to actually move beyond it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the thing is as I've examined the stable structure of like even across all literature, and I'm using AI for this, I was like, well, how do you summarize marginalized? Like, what are I often go, what are the 5 to 10 metrics across, and give me citations for each metric of people making this explicit claim? What are the metrics for evaluating who is marginalized? And if you use the metrics, you see the system isn't following its own ethos, meaning systemic oppression and marginalization is relevant to some categories, but when it specifically happens to other categories who they've already determined are in a different hierarchy, they don't apply them. So it's specific. So in this way, this is why I'm starting to say they're the worst, because I was like, who does that? And first of all, like only quote unquote bad people. That's literally what bad people. That's what the bad guys do. Across every story we write about bad guys, whether Harry Potter or Star Wars or whatever, or in our own lives or in human history. So then, and actually, when anybody seems to do it more on the right, it gets called out pretty aggressively, at least across my algorithm and in news media or whatever. If they do anything that kind of feels like that you're using unequal weights and measures, they get called out on it. I think that's good. But we live in a weird system where the people who are doing it the most get talked about the least. And actually, a lot of that same cohort spends a significant amount of time attacking people doing lesser versions of what they're doing. Meaning we have like laws on the books for most of our, for actually for our whole lives that have specifically marginalized us by cohort. just in the systemic institutional power sense, meaning our voices are less valued by any standpoint theory people, and then our ability to get certain jobs at certain businesses has openly, or certain grants has been like, we literally don't have access to certain grants because of our identity. Don't have access to collegiate opportunities for like whatever whites, Asians get it the worst. Let's not front. Asians achieve the most and get systemically oppressed the most in our modern system. So then the whole thing becomes, well, wait a second, you've invented categories that you don't keep, like metrically, which is why you've then dismissed objective evidence or reasoning. And so it's like, it just becomes this, for me, it's this feedback loop of like, I made the big broad statement because I'm like, I cannot find a way out of it. The only thing I can find is people don't think they're being this. And you're like, yeah, but that's everybody, right? Everyone gets in it. Every person who like walked to the Nazi march and then saluted Hitler when he went by and then just went home and ate a cruller and then never did anything terrible. They never committed any violence. They're just going along, man. You're just going along with the thing. But once you identify what the thing is, if it treats some people as persons and some people as not persons, where their rights can be removed, and this penetrates all the way down to like an improv troupe, but it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. I mean, that's all you need for oppressor and marginalized categories. So then this is my whole thing, is like, are progressives even actually trying? And I mean this more as people who are organizing, leading. I think adherents can come along and have no thought process about this whatsoever. I think the average reasoning capability is around a sixth grade level for adults in the United States of America. So that's a huge part of the problem. But even with the sixth grade uh, logic train, you would just go, well, wait a second, that's not fair. You're treating some groups different than other groups based on identity, race maybe, or whatever, even gender identity, right? If someone's cisgender, that they are less, their voices are less wise, less knowledgeable, is the thesis, which is, I mean, that's just, I don't know. I guess put it in a sixth grade level, that's real intense. That's a real intense thing to get people to try to believe. And since it mostly seems about redefining words to destabilize anybody's sense of conversation, so then basically they become unbeatable because they've said you can't use any of the weapons that we've ever used to overthrow tyranny. So that, at least for the first two questions, is a political if a political movement can redefine core words or basic semantics of human, including reality. The word reality means something different to a progressive than it means to almost everybody else. Truth means a different thing because there's things like my truth or my lived reality or that sort of thing, which is, again, from a sixth grade level, that doesn't exist. And then for the majority of the English speaking population, that's not how we interact with the world. So how do we ensure that these aren't just tools for silence and disagreement or taking tools away from beating them? Even though if it's all lived experience and marginalization, then all I have to do is talk about how the fact that my parents tried to kill me legally because the US allows my cohort to be killed, and how I was banned from entire cities, so that I was segregated against. I was like, that's a better marginalization set claim than almost anybody I know in the past 10 years. People tried to kill me legally. People literally shut me out of entire cities. Okay, so then I have significant marginalization on my side, which means my lived experience has to be taken as higher truth. So at least anybody who's below me has been less marginalized the past 5 to 10 years. Then whatever I say, they have to basically take as higher wisdom than their own.
Well, I'm
So,
less marginalized than you, so
right. So whatever I say, you have to take, or else basically you're violating this standpoint theory element. So I'm just like, it's a pretty tangled web. So if a group claims to value diversity but punishes people for disagreement, are they also enforcing conformity, bypassing like any good faith interaction? Are they so at least in these first two, to me, I was like, at least there's a pretty tenable case that the entire program is built towards building a tyrannical system. And at best, it's a tyrannical system purporting to be benevolent despotism, meaning we will control your thoughts, we will control definitions from here on out. We're changing as many as we want, and you have to use ours or else you're in trouble. But don't worry, it's all going to turn out well in the end.
Well, clearly more to discuss. I
Yes.
don't think we've made a conclusive case quite yet. So stay tuned for
No,
part 2, kids.
part two. Thanks for being here, buddy.
Thank you. Good
Thanks for
to
helping me.
good to kick off season 3 with you.
Heck yeah, man. It's fun to try to figure out the world with you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Much love.
Love you.